It's important we look at the facts.
Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.
Hello everyone. Today I am joined for Planet Holyrood by Paul Hutcheon, who's political editor of the Daily Record, and Douglas Dickie, who is from the Scottish Daily Express. So it's been a busy day already. One word, two
Tell
words.
me about it.
Douglas Ross. So let me start with you, Paul. Was that a surprise this morning then?
It was, yeah. Got one of those dreaded emails from the party press offices talking about an unplanned press conference at 9:30. That means it's serious. And it quickly became obvious what it was about. Douglas Ross, who has promised to stand down from Westminster, has changed his mind. He has U-turned and he's going to be standing for the Commons again, effectively double jobbing as a parliamentarian. The vacancy has arisen because the candidate David Dogood, who was an MP up until recently, has been deemed too ill to stand, even though we had a tweet from his Twitter account saying that he wanted to stand. So we have the optics, basically, of someone who's in hospital, basically wanting to stand again, but he's effectively been binned to make way for the party leader to do another double job. So terrible look for the Scottish Conservatives, terrible for Douglas Ross and his already dismal leadership. And frankly, I don't think he's going to be in the job for much longer. I reckon we're going to have a Scottish Tory leadership contest within months.
So no holding back by you at all. It is
No,
shameless,
it was just so bad. I mean, he's been on the record saying that he does not want to stand again. He knows how potent the criticism of him is of doing the MP and MSP job and the linesman gig and all the extra cash he gets. And he sort of kidded on that he wanted to be First Minister in 2026, but now he wants to go back down the road to Westminster. It's just terrible on so many levels for him.
Right, Douglas, what's your view?
I mean, it definitely came as a surprise, I think, to everyone. The first I knew of it was when I woke up and, checked on Twitter, and I think it was Paul's tweet actually informed me of it. The first I knew of it, that there was going to be an announcement. And at first, in my kind of half sleepy state, I actually wondered if he was going to stand down today. I thought, I couldn't even think of anything, and then it kind of obviously all came together. I think Paul's right about the optics of the situation. What I would say is David Dugan's in hospital right now. The Sun spoke to him, I noticed, and he, from his hospital bed, and he said that he wanted to stand. So, I've got to say, I don't think someone can run an election campaign from a hospital bed. Very, very difficult.
So you defending?
So
Ross then,
I think someone had to step in. Realistically, I think you could question whether it should have been Douglas Ross, whether there was maybe a local candidate there that might have been able to step in and do it. But Douglas Ross is clearly can't try to put forward that this is him wanting to lead from the front.
But it's shameless. I mean, you've just said David is a really, really popular, obviously, MP, well liked. He's decided that this is what he's going to do, or certainly the management. What he's saying, it's obviously the management party, but I mean, I think he's a member of that. I mean, there's no other way to take it. I mean, even a Tory can't trust another Tory at the moment. That's what it looks like.
Well, I think that's going to be Douglas Ross's big problem now, because people are going to be looking at that, and also this ties him to that constituency. So he's now going to have to spend the entire a fair chunk of the general election campaign in Aberdeenshire and Moray. Campaigning. We've seen it with the SNP with Stephen Flynn, who's barely left Aberdeen because he knows he's got a fight in his hands, and that stopped him from supporting his colleagues around the country, which they might have expected from their Westminster leader. and now Douglas Ross is going to be tied to that constituency. I mean, David, I find it interesting how many people on the left and nationalists all of a sudden decided that they quite like David, given that he was one of the few Scottish MPs who backed Boris Johnson, or who continued to back Boris Johnson, and he also backed Liz Truss for leader. So I find it a bit ironic, some of the people who've suddenly decided that they actually quite like him and they think he's a great guy. But
I should make clear, I'm not a David Dogood fan. All right, I mean,
But he is. Is it not fair to say that he's obviously been an MP for quite a long time, and he's obviously respected by the people up there? Is that not fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, he won that seat in 2017. I think it was the first time in 30 years that the SNP hadn't won that seat. So it was a big result for him. But I think it does present a problem for Douglas Ross. Ultimately, whether he's made the decision for the right reasons or not, regardless, when the dust settles, the image is going to be of a guy who was on his sickbed being ousted, and the party leader coming in. But I don't think you can run a campaign from your hospital bed. I just don't think that's possible.
No, I think that's a fair point. I mean, if a press release had gone out saying that David Dogood was standing down or was not going to be selected on for health reasons, and some local worthy was going to take his place, I don't think it would bat an eyelid, really. But the fact that it's Douglas Ross who's muscled his way in just looks terrible, and it plays into this perception of him as a flip-flopper. I mean, he said early doors that Boris Johnson should resign over Partygate. He then changed his mind, and then right at the last minute said he should quit again. When Liz Truss did her budget, that disastrous budget nearly sank the economy. He was calling on the Scottish Government to copy some of the tax cuts. And then after it becomes apparent that it's a complete and utter disaster, he distances himself from the budget. And then with this, he promised that he would not stand again, and lo and behold, he's changed his mind. So he's just... I think Douglas Ross is quite effective at FMQs. He has good scripts. He's put successive First Ministers under a lot of pressure, but he's hopeless outside of the Holyrood chamber. Some of his judgments have been abysmal, and I can well understand why some of his MSP colleagues are muttering about his future.
I think, just quickly to say there, I've completely forgot what I was going to say. But I think one thing that I agree with Paul on is I think there's going to be a leadership contest after this if he wins the seat. I don't think there's any doubt about that at all. I think he sees his future. He clearly sees his future in Westminster. He's taken that. So I think attention will turn to who takes over for him. Megan Gallagher.
And so, who's in the frame? Who do you think?
Well, I would say Megan Gallagher and Russell Finlay are the two most obvious ones. And I just to go back to the point that I'd forgotten a moment ago, but this has come at a really bad time for the Tories, who up in Scotland hadn't been having that bad a campaign. Their votes holding up okay. They're probably going to add. They might add to their MPs. They might completely buck the UK trend, and you might end up adding with it. And it seems like such a needless row to have created out of nowhere at a time when they were doing okay. Douglas Ross is a good few weeks. The Humza Yousaf stuff, the Michael Matheson stuff, he's led really well on that. And then all of a sudden, from nowhere, this kind of nuclear bombs been dropped on the Tory campaign and in the key, the core region, the key area in the northeast. And I think one or two, I would understand if one or two people might be, looking at that and thinking, why has this happened? And
yeah, I mean, there's two scenarios. He loses the seat, in which case I think there'll be a contest pretty quickly. But even if he wins it, then there'll be people in the Tory party saying, well, are you really committed to the Scottish Parliament? Are you really the guy that we want to lead the Scottish Tories into 2026 when you're always down the road at Westminster? It's a terrible look. And And I have to say, Sandesh Gohani and Stephen Kerr are also MSPs, and they're trying to leave the Scottish Parliament as well. It gives the impression that the Scottish Tories think that the Parliament in Edinburgh is small time and B-list, and Douglas just desperately wants to be in London.
So do you think he will relinquish then as leader? He will walk away from leader of the Tories at Holyrood, or do you think he'll be forced to?
I think forced is more likely. I just don't think that the Scottish Conservatives, or the Conservatives more generally, are ruthless. They're more ruthless than the Labour Party in getting rid of underperforming leaders. And I think that many of them will look at the 2026 election and think, we're going to lose our seats. We're going backwards. We're going to go to about 20. Douglas Ross is not helping us in that endeavour. Time to make a change.
And out of the people, as we've just discussed, who do you think at this point?
Well, I think Dougie, I don't disagree with his analysis. You have Russell Finlay, formerly of this parish, former Sunday Mail investigations editor. I'm still kind of reeling at the prospect that he's a Conservative. I'm not entirely convinced he is, but, I'll take him at his word. I think he would be a pretty decent candidate. And then, as Douglas said, you've got Megan Gallagher, who's a bit of a rising star in the Tories. I think maybe deputy leader of the group. I think that's her title. Yes. So you could see those two MSPs going toe-to-toe. But there's a lot of rampaging egos in that group, and I wouldn't rule out further candidates.
I think Megan would be a really interesting leader. I think it would present a massive problem for the opposition if Megan were to get at this kind of working class, young women from the Central Belt going up against the middle-aged John Swinney. Again, the optics of that, Swinney would increasingly look like yesterday's man against a fresh young face. I always think because Russell was a journalist, I kind of hope he stays a bit of a renegade on the outside. I know he's just his spokesman, but a bit more on the outside. I think journalists should always kind of keep their distance. Absolutely. So I think Megan would be a really good candidate.
I think Megan's very good. I think Ruth Davidson, obviously former TV journalist, has proven that there is a path to doing that. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Definitely, as Paul says, whether or not somebody decides to push him. It'll depend, perhaps, on just how well he does, or whether or not he doesn't hang on to it. It's going to be interesting.
There was no love for him anyway before this, and I think this is going to tip folk over the edge.
I think he'll win the seat, and I think he will go off his own. I think he'll say, right, it's only fair that I concentrate in Westminster and let someone else have another go. That's my prediction, although I wouldn't put the mortgage on it because I don't have a great record.
So is this part of the kind of Farage effect then, since we cannot get away from Nigel Farage at the moment? He seems to be absolutely everywhere, either to your joy or your horror. But he's certainly one of the most interesting people to launch himself into this. So, Paul, what's your view?
Well, I think that Farage has lobbed a hand grenade into an otherwise sleepy election campaign. And just look at what the opinion polls were saying before he entered the race. They were predicting a massive Labour victory. What this has done, I think, is guaranteed a massive Labour victory. And we're looking at maybe a majority of 250, maybe even 300 seats plus. And that's because Nigel Farage is going to divide the right-wing vote. Obviously, I'm not a fan
steal it all together.
I'm not a Farage fan. I don't like his politics. I don't look at politics in terms of stopping folk from coming into this country. Reducing immigration is not my thing. But I do recognise there are lots of people, voters throughout the United Kingdom, that's a big issue for them. And Richard Tice, the guy he replaced as leader, made it clear that this is going to be the immigration election for reform. And if you go back a few years to the 2019 general election, the Tories said they would get Brexit done and they would reduce immigration. Now, they did the first bit, but then they made decisions to deliberately increase immigration. So you've got millions of people, what I would call Labour to Tory switchers in 2019, who feel betrayed with the Tories because net migration is now at its highest ever level. They're not going to be voting Tory. They're absolutely furious. They feel betrayed by the Conservative Party, and they're going to be voting for Nigel Farage, who's turned this into a single issue campaign. So my prediction would be, and you may not agree with this, I think that Reform might actually come in second place in terms of the votes. I think they might leapfrog the Conservatives.
I think
the Tories
you
are
could
in
be right,
such,
Paul.
I think they're in such dire straits. And there was actually an opinion poll published very recently, maybe in the last hour, which has Reform and the Conservatives neck and neck. There's no love for the Tories. They're losing shed loads of voters to the Labour Party, and the same is true of Reform. And I think they're going to get squeezed, and I think they're going to come in third place.
Douglas?
I still believe, I've said in the show before, I think, the sanctity of the ballot box, when people are, when push comes to shove, Reform cannot win the election. It's pretty unlikely the Tories are going to win the election. I think even the most, the most true blue among us would kind of concede that at the moment. But Reform definitely can't win. And I think a lot of this initial excitement, we've seen it before with Nick Clegg, Clegg mania. I just think that ultimately, when push comes to shove, people will. A lot of those people who say they're going to vote Reform will vote Tory because they maybe don't want a Labour government. The system we have here, the first past the post, will stop Reform from winning any more than. I think they would be lucky to have one. I think Farage is the only one who they've got a chance of getting elected.
I think they could end up winning 20% of the vote, but get one seat. But that would be enough to ruin the Tories' chances throughout the country.
In terms of, sorry, on you go.
No. I think exactly what Paul's just said. I think there's so many people. Normally, I would completely agree with you, Douglas, but I think there's so many people who are sick and tired of all politicians and all the lies, the spin, everything, that when somebody, we've seen it with, the kind of Boris effect as well. Somebody comes into it and they might just go, right, fine, I'll vote for him. I really do. And I do think that, the Tories are absolutely going to be decimated now.
I think
look at how popular Trump is. Even after everything that's happened, he's still on about 50% of the vote. If Trump can be successful in America, Farage can be successful across the UK. There's always a market, particularly in these times, for politicians who provide simple solutions to complex problems. And I just feel like at this particular moment in history, this is his time. And I think what we're seeing here is an attempted takeover of the Conservative Party. After this election, the right will be completely annihilated, and Farage will say, well, I'm the only person who can bring it back together, unite under me, and he'll effectively try and become leader of the Conservatives or get the Tories to back Reform. But I cannot see anything other than a massive Labour victory on July the 4th now. I wasn't convinced by that at the beginning of the campaign, but now I am.
I do wonder as well if the polls are correct, and people do, I've said that I think a lot of people will end up going back to Tory, in the ballot box. Not all. I'm still thinking Reform 10-12%, which is massive. That's big enough, as you say, to cause real damage to the Tories. I've seen a few people saying that Farage and Reform aren't part of the debate up here, but they're currently polling it more than the Scottish Greens, and so that's another added worry for Douglas Ross and Tories up here, because there's an awful lot of marginal seats in Scotland. There's going to be an awful lot of seats here, under 2,000 votes, where a few hundred can swing it. And the SNP have had the problem, up until now, it's been the SNP have had the problem with the Greens saying they're going to stand 30 seats. I know Alba are a total joke, but again, all it takes is maybe 500, 600 votes in some of these seats to make a massive difference. And now for the Tories, they're going to have, that Reform vote in these swing seats. such as the one that Douglas Ross is going to be standing in now. So it'll be real interesting to see if people, if I'm wrong and you guys are right, then it's a real. I mean, I think political earthquake doesn't even do it justice.
Even though the SNP despise reform, it's in the interest for the SNP for Farage to get a lot of airtime, for reform candidates to stand in the northeast of Scotland and split the right-wing vote, which
because then
very well may happen.
That might save them in some constituencies. Absolutely.
And just one other prediction, Lorna. I think Nigel Farage will win his seat comprehensively. I think it's a demolition job in Clacton.
Yeah, and you're right. It's that Boris Trump kind of far right politics that's speaking to people who are really disillusioned. So anyway, let's talk about something a bit brighter. Do you think the Euros, football, back, Scotland's back, are going to make any difference to this election?
Well, let's work on the assumption that Scotland do not make it into the quarters, the semis, and the final. I know this is difficult, but let's just work on that assumption that Scotland don't do that well, but England do quite well. It sticks in my throat to even put this into the podcast, but it's a possibility. I remember Alistair Campbell, who's the former head of comms for Tony Blair's government. He was talking about when the European Championships were held in England in the mid-90s, and he was always worried that a strong England performance, winning the championship, would be bad, I think, for Labour politically, and also maybe boost support for Scottish independence, because Scots put on the BBC and they see all the sort of English patriotism. I suppose, at the back of my mind, if England do well, will Sunak try and sort of jump on the patriotic bandwagon? If they get into the quarters and then the semis, will that make any difference?
Well, it won't feel kind of like in any way authentic, will it? I think that's the trouble. Do you really believe that he is a huge football fan?
I just think politicians in general would be well advised to stay away from football. But I remember Alex Salmon said in 2014, or reflecting on 2014, he wanted England to win the World Cup that year. Scotland obviously weren't there. He wanted England to win it because he felt that, as we keep hearing about 1966, even the staunchest unionists might have a moment where they say, "Oh, I've kind of enough of this." But football, was it 1970 election? Labour's defeat was down to England getting knocked out of the World Cup by West Germany, changed the country. I've even seen it suggested, even though more than 50% of those who turned up voted for Scottish devolution in 1979. But had we not went to the World Cup in '78 and crashed and burned, would the confidence have been there for more people to back it? It can definitely change the mood of the country. Obviously, with Stephen Flynn this week, given quite an emphatic answer to the question of whether he would be supporting England when Scotland weren't playing. I wonder privately, for the reasons Paul's mentioned, if secretly he might be thinking. And on the other hand, if Scotland do get to the quarters, do get to the semis, does that make people think, that kind of patriotic feeling rising? Is that MP?
Yes.
Or does it make people more relaxed with the status quo and you think, life's not really that bad after all? It's a really interesting, dynamic. I personally, I'm sick fed up of people being asked whether they're supporting England in the Euros. For once, I'm going to say I agree with Stephen Flynn. I won't be
absolutely. Honestly, I'm amazed at the backlash that Scottish politicians get for saying they're not. I mean, look, football, the lifeblood of football is petty geographical rivalry. You wouldn't expect Rangers fans to support Celtic if they got to the European final and vice versa. Of course, you don't want your biggest rival to win a major football competition. The only team I support international football is Scotland. You know, not anti-English. It's just football, and that's it. But you
I
get
think
all
maybe
this
the-
like endless debates about
I think what's interesting though is that if you ask, because I've worked in England, so whether this has got something to do with because Scotland are absolutely no threat to England, or that's what they believe, they genuinely don't understand if why
Yes,
we
true.
wouldn't support England if we are not in it or if we're kicked out, because they generally would say we would support Scotland.
Yeah, you know why that is, Lorna? Because we see them as
explain.
rivals. They don't see us as rivals, which is quite wounding.
It's also easy to say that when you qualify all the time and the team you're talking about doesn't. I would say where I probably differ for Stephen Flynn and Paul is that, to be honest, it wouldn't devastate me if England did win it. It'd be kind of water off a duck's back. I find international football a little bit meh, to be honest. So
I can't relax until England are out, and I say that as someone who loves England as a country.
I think it's so painful for some people. Yeah, you can see them going through the angst of watching a football match, and I suppose
I don't know why. I mean, I don't know why I put myself through it, to be honest with you. So,
well, look, it'll be interesting if Scotland do get through, and you'll see the agony on Stephen Flynn's face because he won't be able to be there. I think that might be the difficulty for him because he is a genuine football fan. You can obviously tell. But yeah, the rest of it should perhaps keep away from it if you don't.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, when they asked about it in the debate the other night, it was butt clenching, embarrassing. And I do think I've got to say I don't think it'd been too much for Stammer or Sunak to maybe give Scotland a wee mention. I think that was a wee bit of an own goal to use a really hackneyed football phrase. But I mean, let's just hope it's a great tournament. And
yes, and we've got an interesting few weeks coming up. Thank you very much, both of you. Well, today's Planet Holyrood will be available on YouTube as usual, and we will be back again tomorrow to do it all over again. Thank you very much, Douglas. Thanks, Paul.
Cheers, Lorna.
Bye.
It's important we look at the facts. Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.